Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to the panel discussion on Central Europe's emerging role in the transatlantic security cooperation. It is my great honor to welcome our three speakers. Dr. Petr Lunak, Deputy Head of the Engagement Section at NATO's Public Diplomacy Division, Dr. Tomasz Smura, Head of Research at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, and Dr. Tamás Csiki Varga, Research Fellow at the Institute for Strategic and Defense Studies, National University of Public Service of Hungary. This event is organized in partnership with NATO's Public Diplomacy Division, the National University of Public Service, and the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. So this event, of course, this is part of the conference series of the Antall Knowledge Center, the Foreign and Security Policy Conference of Budapest. Every year we are discussing a particular topic of importance for the Central European region and the Transatlantic Alliance as a whole. And this year we outlined our hypothesis about the emerging role of the Central European region in the transatlantic cooperation. Now, we are seeing all kinds of defense reforms, the growing of the defense spending in our region and across the alliance, many challenges coming from the eastern and southern strategic direction of the transatlantic alliance. And of course, NATO itself is undergoing a transformation. And my first question and the first topic that we would be discussing is Agenda 2030 of NATO and what the next 10-year holds. So I would like to ask Dr. Lunak to please outline and inform us what do you think are the key points of NATO's transformation? Where is the alliance going forward as a whole?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me just perhaps, first of all, many thanks for your kind invitation. And I would have preferred to be, of course, in Budapest in person and engage with colleagues on the panel face to face and with the listeners, but that is not obvious for, well, it's not possible for obvious reasons. So we'll have to make the next 90 minutes as enjoyable for the panelists and the audience as possible. Let me just say perhaps a few words about the NATO 2030 and where we stand so far, and perhaps a few words about the origins of and evolution of 2030. And as you may remember, the whole process found its origins in the run-up to the December 2019 London Leaders Meeting, London Summit. We call it London's Leaders Meeting, but it was actually a summit meeting. And at the time, there were serious differences of opinion between allies, inter alia, about events in Syria. And several allies, including French President Emmanuel Macron, called for deeper reflection on NATO's political cohesion and strategy. And this debate was channeled into a proposal to launch a, quotation marks, forward-looking reflection process under the Secretary General's auspices, drawing on expertise to further strengthen NATO political dimension, including consultation. As a historical footnote, it is interesting to note that this is not actually the first time that NATO is engaged or has made a recourse to a reflection process. On two previous occasions, in the 50s, in 1956 and in 1966, 1956 and 1966, 1956 was in the aftermath of the Suez Crisis. And in the 60s, in the context of détente with the Soviet Union, NATO also initiated an ad hoc political reflection process. And clearly, the situation nowadays is very different from what it was in the 50s and the 60s. But there are nevertheless still some parallels. Both events, actually in 56 and 66, and now, is what you could see as turning points in transatlantic relations. In 66, in the context of the French partial withdrawal from NATO, the rise of détente, as I said, and questions about the future of the alliance and the transatlantic relationship. So that's something very similar, and frankly, both processes in the 50s and the 60s and NATO 2030 is actually helped redefine and focus the political consensus and ideas of the tasks of the alliance, which was not, which is something that drew attention of the leaders, that we need some reflection on that. And now back to the process. The final mandate for the reflection process, which was, as I said, initiated in December 2019, was agreed in February 2020. And in that context, the Secretary General of NATO was invited to lead a process which was to culminate in him providing recommendations to the North Atlantic Council in time for 2021 summit, which took place in June of this year. And basically, the tasks were how to reinforce alliance unity, cohesion, solidarity, how to increase political consultations and coordination, and how to strengthen NATO political role in addressing current and future threats and challenges. Again, the way the Secretary General, and supported by the international staff about it, was quite unique, because in fact the process was is still as comprehensive as possible. The Secretary General launched the process publicly in June 2020. That's actually when the title NATO 2030 was coined and first used. He said that ultimately the goal of that process should be to keep NATO strong politically, making it keeping it strong militarily, making it stronger politically, and giving it a more global outlook. At the same time, there was an effort, or there is still an ongoing effort, to actually make the process as comprehensive as possible. So, first, the Secretary General actually appointed a group of 10 experts, senior experts, five men and 5 women from 10 allied countries. All were practitioners or are practitioners, experts on international relations, to provide some intellectual input, based on consultations with allied countries. The group was co-chaired by Wes Mitchell and Tomasz de Maizière. Wes Mitchell, from the US, and Tomasz de Maizière, former German minister. The group worked under very special circumstances because of COVID restrictions. Number of, although the idea was to consult stakeholders and thinkers, and practitioners face to face. It had to be done via online means. The group of experts met with allies, partners, NATO parliamentarians were involved, and in December 2020, after half a year, the group delivered its independent report, which was called NATO 2030: United for a New Era. It's a very good report. It's a bit long, but I think it's worth your time to read it. The audience, I'm sure that the panelists have all read it, because it's actually quite an interesting and stimulating read. At the same time, together or simultaneously with the group of experts, the Secretary General appointed. The process was taking place in parallel. For example, the Secretary General appointed a group of young leaders, who also, which was convened. Actually, that was quite new. It was convened for the first time. It was composed of 14 leaders under 35 who met between November 2020 and February 2021 and produced their own report, which is called NATO 2030. embrace the change, guard the values. Again, you know, quite an interesting report. And you know, part of an effort to actually to involve the youth, the future generation, was also that we organized with 10 top universities from allied countries, so-called policy hackathon. You know, a group of teams, in fact, teams from 10 universities, who presented their ideas how to address some of the topics in the run-up to the summit in the context of NATO 2030. In fact, you know, unfortunately, although my effort to actually get a Hungarian university involved, this didn't work out. But hopefully, you know, we will make Hungarian youth and Matthias Corvin, you know, university involved in future endeavors of this kind. Anyway, all these processes led to proposals, to serious proposals, where you know, the Secretary General suggested to NATO leaders in the context of the Brussels summit in June 2021 a series of things that should bring NATO to his vision, that is to make NATO more united politically, keep it strong militarily, and to have a more global output. His proposals contain about 8, or you know, are concentrated in about 8 clusters. First, he suggested increasing funding for core deterrence and defense activities to demonstrate the strength of commitment to Article 5, which is the cornerstone of NATO, and promise to defend each other and, you know, to promote or to strengthen solidarity among allies. Second, in the area of resilience, which is quite a new topic, you know, in response to hybrid threats, NATO actually is much more active now in the area of resilience. So the second cluster of ideas centers around reforms to aim towards a minimum standard for shared resilience among allies. The third cluster is to preserve NATO's technological edge. You know, the Secretary General has set out ideas for a NATO defense innovation initiative to promote interoperability and boost transatlantic cooperations and defense innovation. You know, topics which are very crucial for NATO's future. Fourth, to increase political coordination between allies with more consultations on more issues. Fifth, also, which goes back to the idea of making NATO's outlook more global, was you know, to actually become more global in its outlook, to deal with global challenges posed by the rise of China and Russia's authoritarian pushback against rules-based international order. This, for example, includes enhanced political dialogue and practical cooperation with like-minded partners to promote our values and protect our interests. Then, sixth cluster is to strengthen training and capacity, you know, for partner countries in NATO's neighborhood, because frankly, prevention is better than intervention. Seventh, he has proposed also ways for NATO to address the security implications of climate change. You know, I mean, all this is all these challenges are taking place against the backdrop of an existential threat, which is climate change. And in particular, the idea is to reduce, from NATO's side, we clearly will not be the main actor in addressing the climate change as such, but we can contribute by reducing emissions for military activities and contribute to the goal of net zero carbon emissions. And finally, and I will stop here, is actually, that he recommended to update NATO's strategic concept, to jointly address the changing strategic environment, to recommit to NATO values and reinforce the transatlantic bond. So that's, and I think, perhaps in the discussion, so I tried to sort of explain the context of NATO 2030, but perhaps we could then focus in our discussion on the new strategic concept, on the not only on the process but on its content. I'll stop here for the moment, and I'm ready to sort of come back to the information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Smura, I would like to ask you about NATO 2030 and all the security pressures that now Poland is experiencing. And of course, Poland is always concerned with also a traditional attack from the East. How do you see this more global approach or global aspiration of NATO versus or parallel to the to answering and equipping NATO to the regional threats or the threats coming from our neighborhood?
Sure, thank you. Great question, Zsolt. First of all, let me thank you, the organizers, Antall József Center, Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and University of Public Services for inviting me. As I'm only one pole in the group, I will try to discuss this issue of today's meeting from a Polish point of view to some extent, but which also reflect some Eastern flank countries' point of view, I believe. So let me start by saying that as we all know, the global security architecture is getting more and more complicated. Almost all security analysis right now starts from the observing that we have entered the times of great power competition, as existing international order shaped after the fall of communism is challenged by revisionist powers. And as the transatlantic community, of course, we need to simultaneously face threats and challenges coming from more and more aggressive Russia, more powerful and ambitious China, terrorism, rogue states, as well as our internal issues within the NATO and the EU. So in these circumstances, the Central and Eastern Europe becomes one of the most important regions, I believe, along with the East Asia and Southeast Asia on the geopolitical map of the world. As in the CE region, the interest of the four global or regional powers, like the US, China, Russia, and Germany, meet and overlap. It means that the countries of our region cannot just stand aside waiting for the developments. CE states needs to be fully engaged and influence to the maximum extent such processes as the EU strategic compass and of course the NATO 2030 agenda we discussed today. So, of course, from the Polish point of view, the most important issue in the context of the NATO strategic concept remains the collective defense and NATO's approach towards Russia. In the last couple of years, we saw the tendencies of some European countries to come back to business as usual. What example reminds for the Nord Stream 2, for example. While this country, I mean Russia, has stopped short of fulfilling Minsk II agreements, and as we see, continue aggressive policy towards Ukraine and other neighbors in order to rebuild its sphere of influence. Moreover, Russia intensively develops its armed forces. In spite of all defense and deterrence measures that we have implemented by NATO since 2014, Russia has significant advantage in conventional forces over the allies. As you know, in the Western Military District, Moscow has at its disposal, I believe, 4 armored and mechanized divisions, 3 airborne divisions, 8 independent armored and mechanized brigades, and dozens of other brigades like combat support, naval infantry, Spetsnaz, and so on and so forth. In contrast, for example, the Baltic states armed forces together have at their disposal in the peacetime 5 regular brigades, mainly light ones, while the firepower of EFP units can be considered as equal to 1-2 combat brigades. So among NATO member states neighboring with Russia, only Poland has significant, but still far smaller in comparison military assets, as we have 2 mechanized and 1 armored division, as well as 1 division in process of forming. Additionally, we see increasing unification of Russian and Belarusian armed forces, especially in terms of Air Force. The symbol of Russo-Belarusian military collaboration remains, of course, Zapad exercise. That, as we all know, had also purely offensive dimension. I mean, the last edition. But the last Zapad was only on one of the many exercises of this kind in recent years. In some of them, like hundreds of thousands of troops took part. So our strategic conclusion in Pulaski Foundation was that Moscow right now is mastering new strategic views, let's say, or tactical garnering massive preponderant forces close to NATO border in order to bully some of the allies and undermine NATO solidarity in case of, for example, hybrid attack on the one of the Baltic states or Poland. It's even more important as Russia and Belarus more and more openly use these hybrid tactics against NATO eastern flank states. We have no doubt that situation on our eastern border is result of deliberate policy of Minsk coordinated with Moscow. Moreover, there is more and more questions if the situation around border is not just a smokescreen ahead of military operation against Ukraine, with grave consequences for the whole region. Of course, our strongest asset vis-a-vis these threats and challenges remain and should remain NATO. Thus, Poland really cared to not water down collective defense among allies' core task. So the 2020 strategic concept should be clear from our point of view about the centrality of transatlantic relations and the firmness of political and military bonds between Europe and North America. For all of its allies, NATO should be a point of reference for any discussion that touches upon the Euro-Atlantic security. In fact, no other international organization including the European Union, can replace NATO core mission of collective defense. Among points which can appear in the context of new strategic concept from Polish point of view are, of course, which are the most important from our point of view, but also the most controversial ones. It's, of course, dual track approach to Russia and finding this balance between dialogue and and our position on strength. It's of course integration of the fight against terrorism into NATO core tasks. As I mentioned, is not to water down our NATO main role as a provider of collective defense. The limitation of veto power in the alliance decision-making process. We can come back to this issue later on. And of course, devotion of more political resources to security challenges posed by China. As one may imagine, greater focus on China can result in the weakening of NATO's core task and undermining its ability to defend our members against various military challenges. It can also reinvigorate the vision of NATO as a toolbox for operation against challenges emerging out of Korea, as indicated in the treaty. On the other hand, in result of rising tensions in Indo-Pacific region, our American allies might have to put more focus on this region, what will have impact on their capabilities also in the European theater. So from our point of view, the most important issues in the whole process would be probably how to strike balance between US expectations vis-a-vis the allies in regards to China and stability of Indo-Pacific region and necessity of remaining NATO focused on transatlantic area. So Poland, of course, does not undermine China challenge, but I believe that our approach might be rather that NATO roles towards China should be here in Europe, in bolstering our resilience, making sure that our critical infrastructure is safe, and bad people do not influence our society. When it comes to Polish contribution to NATO and the issue of the reform process, I don't know if we have time right now. So maybe I just only mentioned that of course, as you know, Poland is one of the biggest security contributor to the security of Eastern flank. As you know, along with systematically rising defense spending, now our goal is around 2.5% of GDP in 2030, and big procurement programs of advanced defense systems like F-35, medium-range air and missile defense system, M1 Abrams tanks, Swordfish brigades. Poland is also implementing its territorial forces. The forces are expected to count 80 brigades and around 50,000 of troops. Poland becomes a new backbone of US and NATO presence in Europe. For almost 20 years, Washington and Warsaw have worked together on the issues of missile defense. As a part of EPAA, we deployed the Aegis Archer installation in the city of Redzikowo, which will be activated soon. Within the framework of European Resilience Initiative, the US has deployed to Poland a heavy brigade. We are also host one of the battalion within the enhanced forward presence forces. And Poland undertakes efforts to show that it's not only security taker but also security provider. As you know, Polish Air Forces regularly sends aircraft, MiG-29 or F-16, with ground candidate person for NATO ballistic air policing missions. Within the framework of enhanced world presence, Polish armored company was deployed to Latvia. And moreover, in April 2017, we decided to deploy a motorized company to Romania as a part of our contribution to the security of southern flank. So the conclusion is very simply, our primary focus in the whole NATO 2030 process will be collective defense. And of course, it's not like only Poland only expect contribution of our allies, but we are ready to provide also our capabilities, our efforts to strengthen this dimension of the allies.
Thank you very much. Balance is a very important aspect of the discussion, and as Dr. Smura mentioned, balance between U.S. expectation and the expectation of Central European member states, or balance between collective defense and other aspects of NATO core tasks and points that were outlined in the NATO 2030 agenda. I would like to ask Dr. Csiki Varga, how do you see this balance working out from the point of Hungary as the southernmost Central European state? Does these points that were outlined in NATO 2030 agenda address the balance that Hungary wants to see as we are going towards the new strategic ideas of NATO towards 2030?
Thank you very much. And first of all, also I would like to express that I'm grateful for the invitation to this distinguished panel. Well, when crafting strategy for NATO, it is always, so to say, in the limbo, going back and forth, and there are elements that are returning from time to time again, and this is what we have seen in the past couple of years. Just to add another layer of interpretation to what we have heard and connecting this to your current question, well, we need to see that in the long term, if we are looking for the explanation of strategic processes, what NATO 2030 has signaled is that NATO needs to renew from the inside regarding content politically, so to say. And if we take a look at the processes, back in the 1990s, it was much the enlargement, adopting to the new security environment of Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. And it moved towards crisis management, and crisis management stabilization, fighting insurgency and terrorism became the number one task, by keeping all the others by the turn of the millennium and afterwards. While in the 2010s, it was returned to collective defense as kind of a response to the aggressive Russian actions targeting Georgia and Ukraine. But by 2021, we've seen that member states' particular interests spare very vivid conflicts of interest, as well as there are questions regarding the leading role of the United States after 4 years of Trump presidency, but also witnessing the general global turn of US attention to the Indo-Pacific region. And all these trends have occasionally questioned the consultation, the consensus seeking, and the will of taking collective action within NATO, and this has got to change. This is something that is, I think, very well understood also in Hungary, that there needs to be some change. Also, if we consider the short term, well, let's say lessons learned from the NATO 2030 document, is that this kind of deep consultation that's going on is kind of an antidote to the transactional policy of the trans administration, which kind of underestimated the added value of multinational policy and favored more bilateral negotiations. But if we speak about collective action within NATO, then this cannot go on without the US. And despite the fact that the power of balance or the balance of interests of the parties is changing and shifting, the idea is clear that Europe needs to take a bigger role, and also Central Europe needs to take a bigger role, so to say, to grow up to the necessities. Again, this is pretty much consistent with the views of the Hungarian defensive establishment. And when speaking about returning elements, of course, the return of our conflict is not new, and we speak about the discourse. But what is important for Central European countries and for Hungary as well, that it pushes for keeping the momentum. That's easy to understand when we speak about defense spending. In 2017, only 4 member states fulfilled the 2% NATO guideline. By 2020, 10 member countries. By 2021, if I'm not mistaken, 12 or 13 will fulfill this guideline. So, of course, we need to put more emphasis on this, especially keeping in mind the negative economic effects of COVID. When taking the Hungarian reading of this story, of course, we have a positive track record for the past 5 or 6 years, with the defense spending increasing very dynamically. And we can say that practically in a very few years, Hungarian defense spending increased very substantially. Within 7 years, in between 2014 and 2021, it increased by 300% in nominal terms. And what's in the making, what is coming for the next 3 years, is another increase of about 200% to the current level. So these are enormous increases. And of course, all of this money should go to developing and will go to developing military capabilities, and also sharpening the technological edge the Hungarian defense forces have, and so on. But on the other side of the coin, when we speak about the returning elements, of course, we need to address societies. And in my understanding, we should engage societies even more. The NATO 2030 expert report was not specifically targeting societies, but more the expert community to spark the discussion and the debate. But we also have the task to engage member states, home communities, societies, and increase the ownership, because without public support, we cannot really craft the necessary compromises that we will need. And there are some new elements which are again clearly seen by the Hungarian policy community, that this transformation is necessary to meet the technological challenges of the 2030s to keep NATO's competitive edge. And what's more important, we need a strategic concept that addresses challenges from a multipolar world, that also addresses challenges of high-risk non-state actors, and also military and non-military threats to member states' resilience. This is also what colleagues refer to. And it's important because these are not challenges that would counter warfighting capabilities or military structures, but would undermine the ability of our countries to function normally. So these require different challenges, a different mindset. As for specific Hungarian points, well, it's well known that because of the geostrategic position of the country, we are interested in what is called a 360 degrees approach, that we should have a delicate balance in between various challenges geographically coming from the east and from the south, but these are also different kind of challenges. And what I've seen in the past at least 5 years, or we can maybe say a decade, is that on the one hand, military capabilities in terms of structures, in terms of the number of equipment and the quality of equipment, there was a very significant proportion of losing capabilities and equipment. And in the past 5 years, the countries of the Central and Eastern European region started to counterbalance this loss of capabilities. This is what the Hungarian defense modernization program, ZRINyi, also fits in, and that's why we provide the excessive amount of money for defense. Just to give you some concrete examples, there is a piece of research that I'm conducting and will be published by January, and it took an overview of 8 Central Eastern European countries, the Visegrad 4, the Baltic 3 plus Romania, and took a measure of what has been gained or lost in terms of military capabilities from 2010 until 2020, so in 1 decade. And it is important and interesting to see that the number of active military personnel, for example, increased in these 8 countries altogether by 5%, which means that the countries put more emphasis on having the military personnel in place for various reasons. And for Hungary, for example, it is not only preparing for major combat operations, but also the additional tasks that the military have undertaken in the past 5 years, like border control. But if we consider the number of major equipment, the number of main battle tanks has decreased, for example, by more than 34%. The number of artillery decreased by more than 20% in the region. The available set of combat aircraft less by more than 24%. The number of helicopters in military use less by 10%. So this is something that has to be stopped first and then countered. And it's of course not only about quantity, but also to a large extent about quality. And it's not about only crafting national modernization programs, but also increasing the, so to say, regionalization of these defense efforts. Just to name 2 examples on the Hungarian side, the Hungarian Defense Forces embarked on creating the HQ Multinational Division Central, which would be a framework for Western Balkans and Central European countries, filling in the strategic gap between the Polish and Romanian HQs. And also there is an initiative on creating, and it's been created, the Regional Special Operations Component Command, supported by also the US. And these frameworks also signal that Hungary would like to embed her defense capability development programs in multinational frameworks and possibly develop it together with other countries. What is good news in this regard, that the defense modernization is also coupled with defense industrial investment and development. So there are a couple of programs, joint procurement and development programs, that might be also suitable or promising for allies in the region more specifically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lunak, I would like to ask you to address these issues of member states from the broader NATO perspective. How do you see the emerging role of Central European states, the process of emerging, the thinking about Poland being a backbone of the alliance, Hungary undertaking all these initiatives that Dr. Csiki Varga has outlined? Are the other traditional backbones of the alliance, the Western member states, relieved that the Central European states are taking more responsibility? And how does that process play out during the move towards the new strategic concept? How do these ambitions of the Eastern flank factor into the thinking in Brussels?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I would like to stress that everything NATO does is collective effort. You know, it's very important to see that in that perspective. You know, and it's not a secret that some countries within NATO, you know, are more focused on the threat and challenges that come from the south. You know, whereas our region, I'm of Czech nationality, so I sort of, you know, feel very, very strongly and sort of sympathize with the views, you know, expressed by the Polish and Hungarian colleague. But at the same time, you know, we have to make sure that the alliance as such is actually relevant for all, you know, for all member states to the same degree. We call it in NATO sort of jargon, you know, 360 approach, degrees approach. And I think we have to move that or sort of, you know, follow that path, because clearly, you know, issues such as and you know, how to deal with the geopolitical rivalry, which is basically about addressing the Russia challenge, but also the China challenge is also, you know, we have to take into account the challenges posed by terrorism, you know, which is something that will need to be addressed in the new strategic concept. I mean, but coming back to your question, it is important, and in that respect, you know, things are improving, but we are not there yet. You know, we have to deliver on the not only in Central Europe but also NATO-wide on the defense investment pledge. We have a pledge which was made in 2014 to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense. When the defense pledge was actually made in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, only 3 member countries, you know, were above 2%. In fact, now you have like 10 or 11. The figures for 2021 have not been confirmed yet. But basically, you know, there is a and this has been, you know, 2020 will have been the 5th consecutive year of all member countries, actually, or most member countries, you know, sort of increasing defense investment. So in that respect, it's going in the right direction, including in the Central European region, but we are not there yet. We have to, you know, the pledge is not to spend 1.6 or 1.7. The pledge is to spend 2% and 20% of that on new equipment and you know, and technologies. So I think that's really also very important, because ultimately, you know, this is the best argument for the region to take part, to take its place in leadership. In fact, you know, leadership. I mean, we are all leaders in NATO. It's an alliance of equal members. But you know, it's serious efforts to actually address the security challenges. Let me just say a few words also about the strategic concept, because you know, the overall approach, because I think in fact, if you look at the strategic concept from 2010, it was a novel document in many ways, because it identified three core tasks, which I don't know whether they will be exactly repeated in the same format as they were in 2010. But the question really is, you know, because, for example, if you look at the strategic concept from 1999, these were not, the 3 core tasks were not formulated in such a way. For example, there was a political consultation. Partnerships was not, or cooperative security was not a singled out, you know, task, which was singled out in the 2010 strategic concept. So that's something that needs to be seen. The question also is whether to the 3 core tasks, you know, there should be another task, for example, resilience, you know, added, which some analysts have been arguing for. In terms of, and I'm in favor of agreeing with the fact that the 3 core tasks, or how many core tasks there will be, we don't know yet, should be in balance, including crisis management. You know, clearly there has been a shift over the past few years from towards less deployed missions and greater focus on stabilization through capacity building and training. But the question really is, you know, should we just accept that NATO in future will not do any new big missions in the future? And you know, if so, if that is the conclusion, should we or should we not at least maintain the capacity to conduct crisis management missions, and how to maintain that capacity, which might seem not, of urgent need at this point, but might turn out actually quite important in the future. So that's something that also, we need to address not only in Central Europe, but NATO, NATO-wise. The whole question of southern flank, where when we need to find ways to address challenges resulting from instability, which need to be reflected and addressed in the new strategic concept. So I think what needs to be seen also from the Central European perspective is the right balance between the three, or let's say 3 or 4, I don't know how many core tasks. How to address, for example, the issue of arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation, which have increased, which have acquired an increased prominence in the last few years. So I would argue for the right, what we need to aim at is the right balance between the core tasks that will satisfy the expectations and needs from all regions, not only Central Eastern Europe, but also if you want to divide it in that regions of West European allies and North American allies. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smura. I would like to go more in depth regarding what you've outlined of Poland's role as a backbone of the Transatlantic Alliance, and I would connect that to a report that you have published for the Warsaw Security Forum about the Visegrad country and the V4's role in NATO security. If you're outlining Poland as a major security provider on the eastern flank, what would you, and I'm sorry for the expression, but what would you expect from the neighboring states if Poland is organizing around itself other countries which have less capabilities in the Baltic states, for example, towards the eastern flank? What would you expect, or what is the vision of Poland about a greater defense capabilities in the east, both on the practical side, meaning equipment and manpower, but also on the political side? How do you envision these interests going into formulating the political vision and the new mission of the alliance?
Okay, great questions, Zsolt. But let me first of all refer to what Dr. Lunak said about this balance between South and East when it comes to security and defense. Of course, it's not like Poland is like selfish country and we are concentrated only on our security and defense. As I was trying to emphasize that we try to be not only security taker, but also security provider. So I can only mention that Poland was one of the biggest contributor from the region to the NATO mission in Afghanistan, for example. Poland is not like naval power, but we sent our vessels to NATO operation in the Mediterranean Sea. We sent aviation squadron to Kuwait to fight against in operation against Daesh. Yes, we sent right now our aviation squadron to Turkey, to monitor the developments in the region. So we of course we are very serious about security of our allies from the southern flank, from other regions, from the north, of course, which becomes also very important dimensions of the NATO security. But we expect from our allies solidarity as well. So when it's real security threats we face right now, you can just watch BBC or another channel, to see the situation on the border. We expect from our allies solidarity as well, and real engagement in this NATO core mission from the treaty, which is only one mentioned directly in the treaty or collective defense. Responding to your questions about Polish expectations from our regional allies. So I can only repeat that we expect, from our partners, mainly from the region, to be serious about security. We cannot just say that we are scared by the Russian assertive or aggressive policy towards the neighbors, and spend like 1.5% GDP for security and defense, and do not have such basic capabilities like, I don't know, in fighting vehicles or whatever, or any kind of air defense. Right now, the situation is definitely better. At least the Baltic states, became leaders when it comes to defense spending. But of course, we've got still a long way to go. We have shortages in many important capabilities. And of course, we can say that the countries of the Central and Eastern Europe are small states. We don't have, I don't know, money, people, and so on and so forth. But take a look at Israel, for example, which it's not also like big country, but it's serious about its security. It spends the first share for the security and defense. It develops capabilities, and regardless of not extensive population and so on and so forth, is able to defend itself against like many countries which are not friendly directly towards Israel. So I believe we can do more definitely in the region, and of course Poland is happy will be happy to contribute to security of our partners, but I believe we also expect doing a fair share from our partners.
Thank you. Dr. Csiki, Varga, I would like to ask the same question from you. How do you see the Central European role in negotiating and promoting the interests of Hungary in particular? And also, you have outlined the new initiatives that Hungary is doing, defense industry reforms, establishing new commands. And you were outlining that Hungary is, for Hungary, it's very important, the 360-degree approach, when it includes the East and the South. But how do you see the role of crisis management missions when it comes to areas further than the Balkans for Hungary? What's the right balance for Hungary when it comes to collective defense, crisis management, and other issues? Or Hungary is only focused on our region and says that, if I may say like this, that we will take care, or we will contribute greatly to the security of this region, taking off the burden, but the other parts are more to the member states, closer to those regions that have the threats.
Thank you. Well, let me start that I think we are witnessing a qualitative change in several aspects regarding Hungarian security and defense policy. On the one hand, these are pretty much going along with the changes in a broader sense within the alliance, living up to the current demands of providing security. But it is very important what Tomasz Smura pointed out regarding the role Poland takes, becoming security providers or remaining security providers. In Hungary's case, I would argue that we are now becoming, and in the next couple of years, we are becoming more and more security providers. And this focus is not only on Central Europe, but also going beyond. But as a first step, what we are currently doing in terms of defense capability development, it is very much suitable to strengthen regional defense capabilities and cooperation in terms of manpower, in terms of material, in terms of larger formations, and also in terms of equipment. This, so to say, pillar of the shifting trend in Hungarian defense policy is very much centered on Germany, the German framework nation concept, and on cooperation within the V4. Of course, there is more political content of the Visegrad countries' cooperation than very practical defense cooperation at the moment. But as the Hungarian V4 presidency is going on, I'm pretty sure, and I hope that all colleagues are aware of the policy program of the V4 presidency that tends and aims at refining the working mechanisms and getting the cooperation even to closer terms in terms of defense among the V4. And Poland in this regard has been a very good partner in the past couple of years as well. As I broaden the view, and this is the second element of shifting Hungarian defense policy, is taking up stabilization roles, which is not new in itself because Hungary has been providing troops for the stabilization mission in Afghanistan, some counterinsurgency and anti-terrorist roles in Iraq, and also we've been present in the Balkans for more than 2 decades now. And Hungary has taken over the K4 command in November this year, which is kind of a signal, on the one hand, on behalf of Hungary, that we are willing to take on more. On the other hand, on behalf of the alliance, that Hungary is, so to say, mature enough. The Hungarian defense forces are trained, equipped, and mature enough to take up such a role. So this is kind of acknowledging what we have done in the Balkans. Looking even further, and this is a new development, and this will constitute or might constitute the qualitative change that it's been just announced a couple of days ago, that Hungary will send 2 troops to the Takuba task force in the Sahel region. And this is a region where Hungarian military has not undertaken much of a role so far. Only a few people at HQs, individual positions, or training with low number of military personnel. Now the current mandate is somewhat bigger. It might also include training. I mean, it does include training, advising, mentoring, and assisting. It also might include some fighting roles, combat roles, which is a new development. And this comes together not only with the technological development, but also a change in mentality of the defense forces in preparing for such missions, for training, and so on. So this might be a qualitative change, and of course, this is a clear signal that Hungary wants to undertake a role in crisis management in the broader neighborhood, and particularly in the south of Europe, in the Middle East and North African region. Also, the supporting roles that we have in Iraq are still going on. And it is important for the country, for the Hungarian government, to try to manage the source of the problems as much as possible. Tackle terrorism in the Sahel region, tackle terrorism within Iraq and Syria, and try to stabilize those countries, those partners, also partners of NATO, that could prevent various kinds of military and non-military problems from spreading over to Europe.
Thank you very much. It seems to me like it was very eloquently outlined that NATO was moving in the last 30 years from enlargement through crisis management and a return to collective defense. It seems to me that with all the points that you have outlined, that more countries are taking initiative to become security providers For many years, the big debates and the big arguments in NATO and NATO summits particularly were that countries are not spending enough and they are not taking enough initiative, they are not taking enough responsibility for their own security. It seems to me that now countries are in the last years especially taking more and more responsibility. What kind of challenges does that create? Because in the 19th century, they said in Central Europe that if you're not paying tax, then you cannot vote. It seems to me that in NATO, more and more countries are paying the tax, meaning more defense spending. So are they having, of course, we are all equal in the equal members, but more weight around the table. Does that create any challenge going forward to 2030? And what kind of tasks should be pointed out when we are saying the more and more capabilities building up in the alliance, especially on the eastern flank? Now, this question goes for everyone. I would please share your views. Dr. Lunak, would you like to?
Well, sure. Look, your question already contained an answer to it in a way. I mean, from my point of view, because clearly, NATO is an alliance of equal members. All members have the same rights and the same, politically speaking, of course, but clearly they don't have necessarily always carry the same weight. And the weight comes with seriousness, with not only in terms of and that weight can be sort of measured in terms of concrete defense efforts, and that can be measured very specifically in terms of defense expenditure. So again, I think we need collectively. Except for the 10 or 11, I think it will be this year, allies who spend 22% of GDP. I think this needs to be NATO-wide endeavor. This has been adopted, collectively by all member countries. There were no exceptions to that. The summit communique, well, the defense investment pledge actually carries signatures of heads and state of government of all member countries. So I think it's important to really focus on that area. But coming back to you, I mean, the rights are the same, but the weight, can is in a way a function of real measurable efforts. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Let me continue. So I can only agree that from my point of view, personally, I think that, and I believe also like many Polish experts from our expert community, but I believe that NATO 2% pledge should remain valid. I know that right now there are many voices that maybe we should, I don't know, count this 2% differently. That's like count that contribution to the infrastructure, to the missions abroad. But it's about our credibility and about our work. So starting right now the discussion how to count this 2% of GDP, it's like open Pandora box. Probably right now we've got like clear issue. We agreed that 2% in cash, it's expected contribution from the allies, and we should go into this direction. And if we change it somehow, we to some extent lose our pace, and probably we will never reach this expected contribution we have to have. And as I mentioned, maybe it's not such a big problem for the region, because we right now the situation is better. Poland, of course, spent the more than 2%. Baltic states spent. I know that Czech Republic or Hungary not yet, but you've got like plan how to reach this point. But when it comes to some of our Western colleagues, it's still a problem, and it seriously impact our common capabilities. As we know that Germany, who is like the also like framework country and backbone of the security architecture in our region, has only like a squadron of Eurofighters, which is able to fly and take a mission. So it really impacts our capabilities as a whole allies if we haven't like enough defense spending, you know, and contribution.
Well, perhaps if I may add, you know, I think the picture is better than it was in 2014, you know, and I agree with what Mr. Smura said. And we need, you know, as I said, this will be the seventh, if I count correctly, the seventh consecutive year of growing defense spending across European allies and Canada, including in Central Eastern Europe. You know, overall, collectively, you know, NATO has added about 260 billion US dollars extra on defense since 2014. These are no small numbers, you know. But again, and allies are investing heavily in you know, in new capabilities and contributing to NATO missions or operations. Although we don't have as many missions and operations as we did a few years ago. But you know, again, and that goes beyond the question that Mr. Csepregi asked. It's not only about collective sort of weight, but it's also about a better balance in transatlantic relationship. You know, one of the reasons why we are now, you know, start drafting, or the allies are drafting a new strategic concept is that you know, we need to somehow capture the or chart the way for you know, for the future of Euro-Atlantic relationship. It's no secret that the relationship even with NATO has been tested over the last few years. And again, you know, with the new U.S. administration, there is an appetite. It's not so new. It's been in power, you know, for quite some time already. But there is an appetite to turn the page and write a new chapter as part of a new approach, and you know, strategic concept, which is NATO's most solemn document next to the Washington Treaty, is, I think, an excellent place to enact a renewal of vows between North America and Europe. That is also important. It's not just about money. It's also about the future of transatlantic relationship.
Thank you, Tamás. How do you see this issue going forward in the future?
Thank you. If you want to summarize also what we have heard, but giving a direct answer to your question, we can kind of build it around the 3 articles of the Washington Treaty. This is something that's frequently brought up. Article 3, which means doing our homework and manage the, so to say, home front, provide the defense expenditure, not only inputs, but also measuring outputs within this cost capabilities contributions framework, providing for capability development, providing for resilience. And again, I would like to stress that we need to strengthen the discourse at home and increase the understanding of our peoples, increase the ownership, because otherwise there will be no political support for providing the money for defense, national and also allied defense. Article 4 calls for increased consultation, and in the next strategic concept, of course, this will be carried on, including cooperation. And what I would like to call the attention to is increasing regionalization in developing larger formations and harmonizing capability development as much as possible. In the wider framework, of course, this fits very much into strengthening the European pillar of NATO. But this is something that we need to address very carefully, because the technological innovation that is coming up, that is required, transformation is the most expensive part. And there are various elements that we only can do together, not only in national framework. And of course, Article 5 is about collective defense. I would like to, expand a little bit. calling for collective action, because it would include also crisis management. That is something that we cannot expect that will, just pass away, and there will be no crisis that NATO will have to manage, either civilian or military kinds of crisis. And we need to be prepared, sad but true, but we need to be prepared that it is a possibility that not all member states would come to a consensus when we speak about crisis management. So it is possible to consider those coalitions of willing that includes NATO member countries, EU member countries, third parties, whom we are going to engage in order to have a better effect in any crisis region. And the first step from NATO's point of view, and from the point of view of the strategic concept, is to increase the consultation with these partners as well. It is topical to bring it up, and I just want really to mention the NATO-EU cooperation, especially in the technological realm. This is something that the European Union has more leverage, especially in the European theater, to play with.
Thank you very much. I would like to have one final round of question. It might be a naive question, but I think it's very important to address, because it was mentioned that without the citizens' support and the public support, the whole discussion and political elaboration that is ongoing in NATO is not beneficial, because we won't have popular support. So I would like to ask, what do you think are the most important points that have to be communicated to the public? And also, how do you communicate success? And I have to confess that one of that, for example, we at the Knowledge Center are doing is that usually we ask about challenges and opportunities, but we rarely ask about the results that have been done. And now you have pointed out many results or achievements. It's even better to use that expression. So Tomasz, I would like to ask you, how do you communicate when the processes and the developments are going as planned, and NATO is successful, and you don't highlight only challenges, but having a balanced approach when we're going, like, for example, in 2030, how do you envision that process of engaging the public?
Yeah, thank you. It's another great question. So, of course, in such complicated processes like NATO 2030, the involvement of people, of citizens, is inevitable. It's especially more and more difficult, as we discussed. Right now we are discussing about the interest of the defense spending, which is very crucially important issue when it comes to the whole credibility of the NATO. And on the other hand, we've got in the middle of economic crisis, the third in the road after the crisis about the Greeks, after the COVID issue, and so on and so forth. There are like many expectations, to increase our spending into economy, into development program, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, you need to explain your citizens that as a point we need to spend like $20 billion for the air and missile defense. So which mainly goes to another country, which is of course difficult. So it's crucially important to explain our citizens how seriously challenges and threats we face. I think that's it's absolutely crucial and inevitable to engage somehow. Of course, I'm talking from the position of man working for the think tank, but it's also, like objectively for the public administration in Poland, in our partner states, from the point of view of NATO, it's absolutely necessary to work with the civil society, with the journalists, with the universities, with the academia, to influence and to reach as many people as possible, explaining, the whole geopolitical situation around the world and how it influences our societies. As threats and challenges are more and more complicated right now. As you see, it's not only about the tanks. Having the tanks on the border, it's like clear signal that we are under the threat. But right now, as you have, like many hybrid tools, like there is an issue of disinformation, about the issue about influencing our political processes in our countries, which is not such clear as standard military threats. Education and working with the society is getting more and more important. Yeah. So I think like such, the whole process, it's not only because Petr is with us, but how we conduct the NATO 2030 process it's kind of poster type. It's good that from the beginning we engaged the think tank community from all the Europe, the experts, public influencers were included into the process, and it's clear and transparent. We all understand how this process is conducted, what will be the final result, what are the goals. So really good job, and we need to continue to conduct such process in this transparent and logic way, working with the civil society, think tank communities, experts, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. Tamás, how do you see this issue? And because you have been pointing out that Hungary has a very complex 360-degree view. It's not that I'm envious of the Polish geopolitical position, but of course that creates a more alarming threat perception. How do you see in the case of Hungary communicating both the challenges and both the successes that are now done in Hungary with the points that you've elaborated on?
Well, of course, one can argue that this is so much easier when you are in the position of the Baltic countries, because there is one very visible, very high potential threat that can be identified and shown to the people that, yes, you need to prepare for this and you need to spend money in order to be able to defend against these kind of threats. At the same time, maybe it's so much better if you are not in the immediate neighborhood of such a potential threat. For the Hungarian case, well, I wouldn't argue based on the same argument that we should only put the challenges of migration to the forefront and run all discussions on this issue, because that's not only a one-time show, but one major shock that was received by Hungary and European countries back in 2015. But the situation has changed a lot since. The problem might come back, but this is not something that determines our everyday life and everyday work and all the defense developments that we need to do nationally and also in the allied framework. So it's very useful to have a more elaborate discussion on these issues. And of course, we need to channel some simple messages identifying the most important core problems. But in a general sense, I would argue that we need to, on the one hand, increase visibility of the armed forces, of the tasks, what the armed forces undertake. And in the region, the high visibility NATO exercises do this favor for us. We need to increase transparency. We need to show the people what do we spend the money on, what is it spent for, and why is it a good investment. And in a very general sense, we need to increase the dialogue. We need to keep people informed and thinking about these possibilities. And this is not a black and white story that if it's about one threat, then it's spent well, and if it's about some other threat, then it's spent unwisely. But there is a wider variety of threats. And we need to pinpoint and communicate very directly where do our efforts meet the challenges. So when we spend some money on something, does this help preventing or countering a power outage, a border crisis, a terrorist attack, some kind of direct military threat. So what's the point of spending all the resources? And it's also important to make people understand, or to try to explain, that what we do today and what we provide for today, the money we spend today, is not about the capabilities that we will have tomorrow, but it takes 5, 10, even 15 years to develop these capabilities. This is a long-term process. The more countries involved, the more difficult it becomes. And usually we draw the parallel with the transformation of the security environment back in the 1990s. If we think back 20, 25 years in time, then we can still remember the violent breakup of Yugoslavia, a bloody civil war, just to name a European example. And if we think forward 20, 25 years, who knows what is going to happen? There is a belt of instability surrounding the European neighborhood. There are some countries in the east and in the south that are not so strong. We can consider them fragile states. So it might be the case that in 10 to 15 years, when we will have some of the hardcore military capabilities that we currently develop at hand, we will really need them. And it takes a lot of time to develop these, to provide logistical background, to provide the training, and to learn how to use these forces together. But this is a very specifically military design view. We also need to explain what the soft challenges and our answers to soft challenges constitute. And in this regard, my last comment, it was very disturbing and alarming what the COVID-19 2021, you can name it, brings about in terms of funding. Because in the very beginning, we were very much alarmed that this might come to the consequences of similar of the 2008-2009 financial crisis that resulted in very deep cuts in defense spending and loss of capabilities, those capabilities that I referred to earlier. Now, the good news is that despite of the difficulties and the effects of COVID-19 also in the economic realm, as for the moment, and speaking more specifically about Eastern and Central European countries, there seems to be a very firm political support behind maintaining the current trend of increasing defense spending and providing support for the military and for other joint capability development programs. There is no plan for cutting the expenditure. This is not so much a characteristic of all member countries, but we can hope that at least the very negative circumstances that we have seen a decade ago will not commence again. Now, this is something that we need again to explain to the public, that when we have various economic problems and we need to address various challenges, including health care problems, then there is still one element that is a long-term investment, defense and security, where we cannot take all the resources, we cannot take the political support, we cannot take away the societal support.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lunak, how do you see communicating the 2030 strategic agenda?
First of all, let me start by saying that what I tried to say at the very beginning is that there was, the effort to sort of frame somehow the process had a very strong public dimension, involving think tanks, appointing group of experts, including young leaders, policy hackathons. So there was always, because frankly, this kind of process and ultimately the NATO strategic concept, which will be public document, it was not like that in the past. During the Cold War, strategic concepts were actually secret documents, but it has a very strong public role. And I think this. I mean, I was here already, and I was involved in the context of the group, in the context of the group led by Madeleine Albright in 2010. Who sort of also presided or chaired a group of experts providing input for the 2010 strategic concept, but what I can see now is a much wider effort, or what we are trying to do is a much wider effort to involve publics, including the successor generation, because that is very important. The second point is that in fact, if you look at the figures of public support for NATO in Central Europe, the figures are improving. You know, they were pretty good always in Hungary and Poland, but even in the Czech Republic was somewhere in the middle, so as always. But you know, the figures are improving in terms of public support for NATO. Even in Slovakia, where a few years ago, you know, the figures were pretty disappointing. And if you look at the breakdown, it's actually among the successor generations that the picture is much better than it was a few years ago. How we, because I work for the public diplomacy division, how we address it? Well, we are trying, and it has been said by colleagues already. You know, it's difficult to sometimes explain issues that are very technical, which, you know, somehow do not necessarily impinge upon or concern, you know, everyday life. But nevertheless, there are a way of clustering them, you know, to explain. And the way we are trying to approach it is that, you know, basically for everyone, NATO does two things. NATO protects, NATO unites, and ultimately NATO strengthens. NATO protects means, you know, in the sort of in a very military sense, this is a way to somehow or under this pillar of the overall strategy, we are trying to explain the sort of traditional military activities, you know, military exercises, you know, deployments, enhanced forward presence, tailored forward presence, things like that, you know, military exercises as well, air policing in the Baltics, and you know, activities in the Black Sea region. Under NATO unites, it's the sort of political dimension of the alliance. How how working together actually enables allies to arrive at a common solution and you know, common future in all key areas. And NATO strengthens is more towards partner audiences, you know, in partner countries, trying to explain to them, or somehow, you know, get them involved in the sense that, well, actually your country or your society working with NATO actually strengthens you as a country, but also as a society. So that's in a nutshell. But it's not easy, and you know, it will take a lot of effort in the future also to get the successor generation, which somehow has very different ways of looking things and actually perceiving things also in terms of channels. That's why a lot more is done actually through digital channels now from the center. But it will not, from the NATO headquarters, I mean, but it will not work unless the member countries themselves, and you know, they are aware of it, take the lead and in sort of explaining this to their publics.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank you for sharing your expertise and wisdom. It seems to me that we have proven the hypothesis of Central Europe's emerging role in the Transatlantic Alliance with a lot of results that have been achieved and which are undergoing, with also highlighting that still there are many challenges and many tasks in front of the alliance, and including the Central European member states to do as we move forward to 2030. With that, let me thank our speakers again, and I recommend to our audience to read the suggested readings, as we were discussing very deep and complex topics. It's worthwhile to dive deeper into these issues, which you can do in the recommended publications. Thank you very much, and I wish you the best.